Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We'll give it a little bit to let folks get on, and then we'll get started. Hello, everyone. We're just giving a little bit of time to let folks join on, and then we'll get started. All right. I can get started as folks join on, and we have a little bit of housekeeping things to take care of. So hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest Housing First webinar. Housing First supports income security. My name is Peggy Bailey. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Vice President for Housing and Income Security at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. We picked this topic today to highlight the fact that as we talk about housing first as a philosophy to addressing homelessness, it's important to think about what are the package of services that are needed to help people stabilize in their housing and begin to thrive. We also know as we talk about homelessness and the narrative around homelessness, oftentimes people who are unhoused get blamed for being unhoused because of their mental health condition or a substance use challenge or other issues, when really not having a place to live is an income issue to begin with. There are many people who have a variety of challenges in their life, and they're able to stay housed because they have the income to support being able to pay their rent or their mortgage. For people experiencing homelessness, it's the first and foremost, they don't have the money to be able to close the gap between their income if they're working or the benefits they're receiving if they're on SSI or some other benefit program to be able to afford their rent. And so that's why we're here today, is to highlight that gap, the gap between rent costs and 30% of people's income. And that's partly one of the reasons why I'm particularly excited about today's webinar, is in recognizing that piece of that essential piece of the puzzle. At the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, we recently combined our housing team and our income security teams together, so that we're focused. We've brought together the focus around housing and paying for rent and the rental assistance that people need, with the just being affordability and income. And primarily, we've focused on TANF and how the TANF, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, how we can orient that more to paying for providing cash to families. And then thinking about the future, which we'll talk a little bit about today, is how do we just give more unrestricted cash to families so that they can pay their rent and meet their other basic needs. So with that, I want to handle a few logistical pieces. I want to make sure everyone knows that we are recording today's webinar, and that along with the slides from today, you'll receive those in a separate email in the next day or two. If you want to ask questions, you'll see along the bottom of your screen the Q&A box. Please use that box. That is where we'll take questions at the end of today's session. The format for today will be that the presenters will go first, and then we'll have plenty of time at the end, probably 20 to 30 minutes for questions from the audience. So please start to tee up those questions. All right, next slide. So I'll run through who's speaking today. Oh, I thought the next slide was the overview of the agenda. There we go. Each speaker will introduce themselves, but we'll start with Eric Gartland from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. So Eric.
Great. Thanks, Peggy. Just a quick introduction. So my name's Eric Gartland. I work with Peggy at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities on the Housing and Income Security team as a research analyst. So before the other speakers dive into talking about the role Housing First can play in increasing incomes, I'm going to share a few charts that help explain the housing affordability crisis impacting renters with low incomes. This chart shows the percent change in median rent and median renter household income over the past 20 years. And you can see compared to 2001, median renter income is only 3% higher today after you adjust for inflation. And meanwhile, in that orange line, you can see that median rent is nearly 18% higher today after adjusting for inflation. So you can see rents have steadily climbed over the past 2 decades while renters' incomes haven't kept pace. And that's created this persistent gap between incomes and housing costs. And you'd see from 2019 to 2021, housing costs continued to climb while renters' incomes stagnated. And that only widened the gap between income and rent, and that put affordable housing further out of reach for many renters during the pandemic. And rapidly rising rents are really what's driving this growing gap between housing costs and income, with many renters being hit hard by rent increases. So these rent increases impacted all renters during the pandemic, and in many cases rose faster than overall inflation, but it hit some renters harder than others. Here you can see the percent change in median rent from 2019 to 2021 by income group, with that dashed line indicating the overall inflation rate of 6%. So overall, median rent grew 9% for all renters, but rent increases really hit the lowest income renters hardest. So those renters making less than $15,000 faced the steepest increase, with rents rising 12%, and that's roughly double the overall inflation rate during that period. And we know families with the lowest incomes were already most likely to have to make these really tough trade-offs between paying for things like food and gas and paying rent. And being hit with these steep rent increases really just means that those housing costs are further straining their budgets, leaving even fewer resources to pay for just basic necessities. And among the lowest income renters, right, so that group making less than $15,000 a year, there are significant disparities in rent increases by race and ethnicity. So this chart shows the percent change in median rent from 2019 to 2021 among households making less than $15,000, broken out by race and ethnicity. And you can see Latin and Black people experienced the highest increases in rents at 16 and 15% respectively. That's close to 10 percentage points above overall inflation. And we've seen increases in rents have slowed in recent months, but obviously housing costs remain very high for many renters. And amid these rising rents, we saw a lot of policies enacted in 2021 that assisted millions of renters nationwide during the peak of the pandemic. So this is a chart from the Eviction Lab, and it shows the total renter households with incomes below the poverty level covered by a state eviction moratorium over the course of 2021 in red. And the blue line shows the cumulative number of renter households receiving emergency rental assistance, which you can see reached close to 4 million households by the end of 2021 after a slow rollout at the start of the year. So one-time cash payments in the form of stimulus checks also put more money in renters' pockets, and the expanded child tax credit helped dramatically reduce child poverty while it was in effect. And in the first half of 2021, we saw that the CDC eviction moratorium helped prevent an estimated 1.5 million eviction filings nationwide before expiring in August. And during that same period, unemployment coverage was expanded to a broader group of workers, and benefits were increased substantially. And so all of these, unprecedented relief measures temporarily boosted renters' incomes and protected millions from eviction and helped many renters stay housed during the pandemic. And these policies really underscore the importance of both working to increase renters' incomes and expand rental assistance that helps close that gap between what people can afford and the cost of rent. But most of these relief efforts were temporary, right? So most eviction moratoriums have since expired. The emergency rental assistance program is largely winding down as funds are spent. And returning to this, business as usual means that many people with the lowest incomes will continue to struggle to keep a roof over their heads as they face that large gap between incomes and the cost of rent. So as an example, this is from the National Low Income Housing Coalition's Out of Reach report. So just to consider, a renter working a full-time job at federal minimum wage at $7.25 an hour. So if you're working 40 hours a week, that earns you $1,257 each month. And in order to afford rent at 30% of their income, so that's HUD's definition of housing affordability, they would be able to pay $377 for rent each month. But affording even a modest rental home is much more expensive than this in many places. So for example, in my home state of Wisconsin, where the minimum wage is set at the federal minimum, a one-bedroom rental home at fair market rent costs $777 a month. So that would leave this person working full-time at minimum wage with less than $500 a month to cover all other expenses. And if you consider someone living off of SSI, making a fixed income of a little over $900 each month, that leaves them with less than $200 to pay for all of their expenses after they cover their rent. So if you do the math, that means someone making minimum wage in Wisconsin would need to work 82 hours per week to keep housing costs at 30% of their income, more than 2 full-time jobs just to afford rent. And if they needed, a 2-bedroom rental home, they would have to work 102 hours per week just to afford rent. So that really means many workers making low wages are often forced to choose between working these, impossibly long hours just to afford rent or having housing costs eat into their budgets, leaving less resources for essentials like food and healthcare. And in many cases, if someone living off of SSI alone, they would be unable to cover rent even if they put, every single dollar of their benefits to pay rent. So due to this severe shortage of affordable housing and very limited funding for rental assistance, many renters with the lowest incomes are forced to pay more than half their income just to afford housing. This is a chart that shows the share of renters in low-income households that pay over half their income for housing, what HUD defines as severely cost-burdened. So overall, nearly 40% of all renters in low-income households are severely cost-burdened. And that severely cost-burdened share is highest for Asian and Black renters living in low-income households at 43 and 42%, respectively. But you can see here, severe cost burden is a really prevalent issue for renters with low incomes of all races and ethnicities. You can see even like the lowest shares in this chart show 1 in 3 renters with low incomes paying more than half their income each month to cover rent. And these high rent costs put people with the lowest incomes at greater risk of housing instability, such as eviction and homelessness. And experiencing homelessness obviously represents, the most severe form of housing instability caused by that large gap between incomes and rising rent costs. And we saw from 2007 to 2015, there was, a fairly steady reduction in homelessness. Particularly the number of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness dropped very significantly. But we saw this progress reverse in 2015 and unsheltered homelessness started to rise again. And this chart shows that percent change in people experiencing homelessness since 2015 using HUD's point-in-time count data, essentially, a census of unhoused people on a given day each January. And the dashed lines indicate missing 2021 unsheltered homelessness data due to pandemic-related data collection issues. So you can see, while overall homelessness remained roughly the same between 2020 and 2022, this masks some uneven progress, with sheltered and unsheltered homelessness, largely returning to their pre-pandemic trends. And the number of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness has increased each year since 2015, while sheltered homelessness has fairly steadily dropped. And I think it's really important to note, without things like eviction moratoriums and emergency rental assistance, we very likely would have seen a much larger increase in homelessness during the pandemic. But it's obviously still very concerning that unsheltered homelessness has continued to rise despite these policy interventions. So as the other speakers will explain, the housing first approach is really critical to changing this trajectory, because it not only focuses on quickly rehousing people, typically by way of rental assistance, but also includes those supportive services that really help people not just increase their incomes, but pursue other life goals. So that, I will pass it off to Hannah.
Thank you, Eric. I'm going to turn my camera on where everybody can see me. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hannah Meharry. I'm the Executive Director of the Mississippi Balance of State Continuum of Care. If you work in the homeless response system, I think you're probably pretty familiar with your local Continuum of Care. We are the regional oversight and planning body for homeless response systems, especially through COC, EISH, and ESG funding. I'm here to kind of talk about rural communities and how we've worked to increase income and get people back into the workforce in rural communities, with taking into consideration the very unique aspects of working in a balance of state and within rural communities itself. I cover 71 counties in Mississippi. So each of those counties are unique. Every community that we serve is unique. Every single homeless individual we serve is unique. And so taking that into consideration, we have tried to localize our services as much as possible. Our 71 counties is divided up into 5 regions, and we have localized our street outreach and housing efforts within that local regional coalition. We always say you have to know your community's culture. You have to know your community's agencies, and you have to know your community's resources in order to get someone truly out of literal homelessness in a rural community and build that support system. With that, so our bread and butter, and I say this all the time, is street outreach. We have street outreach teams in each of our communities. And that street outreach team is responsible for locating people who are in literal homelessness and then starting that housing conversation. And hand in hand with that housing conversation is a conversation about income. So we're going to talk about getting people back into the workforce, getting people into jobs. From that first conversation, we all know it is much easier to get someone back into the workforce from a housed situation. So we want to make sure as soon as they are able to move in, that they're in the process of looking for employment, they're in process of increasing their income from day one, and knowing that that is a part of the housing process. It's not housing only, it's housing first, but it also comes with all the support services. So like Eric said, the supportive services around workforce development and income is extremely important in the long-term stability for our clients. With that being said, like I mentioned, it's income. So that includes earned and unearned income. We know that there's a trend lately, even in rural communities, that our homeless population is getting older. And especially in our COC, we're really trying to focus on chronic homelessness. So we know that includes individuals who are also disabled. So making sure that we're not only getting people who are able-bodied back into the workforce, but those who are unable to enter the traditional workforce are still able to increase their income through SSI and SSDI. And our COC, we've really emphasized the SOAR program. So making sure that we have our COC funded agencies have staff members that are trained in SOAR, so they can walk our clients through the disability process, and making sure that they are able to apply as quickly as possible in order to get those benefits started. Because the sooner we can get income up, the sooner we can kind of move forward in the housing process to eventually discharge them from housing into stability. Also with our individuals who aren't able to enter the workforce, identifying housing options that would work for them when they have a limited income, when they have they're not able to increase their income. So making sure we have relationships with our local housing authorities to talk about mainstream vouchers. Also making sure that we're in communication with our Center for Aging and our Adult Protective Services. So if there's any individuals that need access to long-term treatment, that because they're elderly or have long-term chronic disabilities, that they're able to. So making sure we're also respecting that. And this is one of the biggest things I talk about is understanding the local employment market. Since we are working in rural communities, there's no Indeed.com in the middle of some of our rural communities. There's no Win Job Center. There's no staffing agency. So making sure that our local agencies who are housing their local homeless population understand that their local employment market, and it might be your cousin knows another cousin that knows another cousin that has a job available. That's literally how it works in rural communities. So making sure that our agencies and our street outreach teams and our housing teams understand the local labor market. So really focusing on that has been extremely helpful. And then respecting client choice, because we always talk about client choice. That's day one as well. So when we start this conversation about housing, we start this conversation about case management. We're also having that conversation about employment. What experience do these individuals have? Like, have they ever gone through a previous training program? Would they want to go through a training program? What kind of experience have they had in the workforce? Because we know it's very difficult to get back into the job market when you might have a gap on your resume. So understanding what their experiences are, understanding what they want to be focused in, because we know that's going to be a better chance for success long term. So we always try to focus on that as well. Local and state efforts on trying to increase our homeless population's access to the workforce and to employment. We have a program with the Department of Transportation here in Mississippi to get homeless individuals who are interested into CDL license so they can actually have a long-term career. We actually have a few municipalities. One of our largest cities in the balance of state, and I say large, is 38,000 people, but they are really trying to be as proactive as they possibly can. And they have created a workforce program through their city with a local staffing agency, with their city public works, with the municipal court, so people can actually have like a transitional job. So they'll be working part-time under this beautification project, doing litter pickups and other, public, plantings and things like that. They'll work for a staffing agency for a short amount of time, and then they're able to transition into a full-time position. So making sure that those who maybe haven't been in the job market for a long time, identifying transitional positions for them so they can then leeway into a longer-term position. We also have a relationship with the Mississippi Department of Employment Services. So making sure that if there is a local Win Job Center, that our housing programs are very familiar and basically best friends with that local Win Job Center, and they're able to get their clients into the Win Job Center as quickly as possible to determine what jobs are available in that region. A couple of things that COCs can do to actually focus on getting clients into employment and getting growing income is, even within your continuum of care written standards, under our case management policies, we've included employment and increasing earned and unearned income as a written standard under our COC's written standard. So any agency, whether it's COC, ESG, SSVF, any agency that is a active participant in our continuum of care are working under the same standards when it comes to case management. And that includes employment, because we know a lot of our returns to homelessness are directly tied to case management. What quality case management did they receive? And then also, were they able to find financial stability in order to reduce their probability of returning to homelessness? And then also another thing that our COC does as far as prioritizing income growth for our project participants is within our ranking review process and the rating process itself. Under the ranking review process, earned income is a performance measure. So earned income is a performance measures for our COC programs for project stayers. So for the clients that are currently in their program, and for all the clients that are program leavers. So that means that they have actually like graduated out of the program and have been discharged from program. So making sure we're taking every opportunity we can to increase our prioritization of workforce development and employment and increasing income for our clients. We do, because we know that's their best chance to have long-term housing stability is through making sure that they have access to reliable income. And so that I kind of went kind of quickly, but all my rural communities, if you want to add into what I've been saying, please put it in the chat. And if y'all have any questions for me as far as the continuum of care and all the continuum of care efforts that they can take to making sure that income is a priority within the Housing First process, please put it in the chat. And right now I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Green Bloomfield, and she's going to talk about her agencies.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am the Director of Program Operations with Flagler Housing and Homeless Services at St. Joseph's Villa. Here at the Villa, we believe that every member of our community deserves a safe and stable place to call home. Housing is the first step to building stronger children, families, and communities. We provide community-based rapid rehousing assistance to families, single individuals, youth between the ages of 18 and 24, who are all experiencing homelessness in the greater Richmond and Tri-Cities regions. We offer support services such as case management, budgeting assistance, short-term financial assistance, linkage to community resources, and education around tenant responsibilities are all provided based on need. Also, what we'd like to do is to help the individual participant, help the individuals and/or participants remain housed. For us, housing is the first thing that we are trying to make sure that we establish. So this Housing First, the Housing First idea is what we uphold. Housing First allows us a rapid rehousing continuum of being able to get our individuals into housing as quickly as possible. Housing first, not housing only. So with this housing, it helps us for individuals who are experiencing all types of different urgent other situations. We are trying to focus in and hone in on the urgency of housing. Getting them in is our most urgent situation that we're trying to accomplish, and making sure that we are addressing all of the basic needs of housing first. After housing is obtained, case managers can more easily address the factors that led to the homelessness. These factors may include the increase of the need to increase their income. It may be through employment, Social Security, SSI or SSDI, other incomes such as TANF, and most of the time, the reason why a lot of our individuals have not connected to their income is because they have not had an address to connect with. And so now that they are in their housing, we can then address all of the other barriers that were stopping them from being able to be successful. I do have one story I'd like to share with you regarding one individual that we had who spent 40 years under the bridge. This participant was 40 years under the bridge, 10 years of working. His employer never knew that he was experiencing homelessness. And then one day he missed a day. And then it was a second day. And then it was a third day. And then it became obvious that there was something going on. Well, he ended up losing his job. But before he lost his job, 40 years under the bridge, 10 years of working, and no one even knew that he was homeless. We were able to work with this particular participant. I specifically am a certified SOAR worker. And so I was able to connect him to Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services, which is known as DARS. We also connected him with a coach. We were able to get him to a an environment in which he was able to thrive, he needed someone to come alongside of him. So once we got him into housing, we were at that time able to address all of the barriers that were causing him to remain on the street under the bridge for 40 years. And so once again, I want to encourage you to look at the housing first approach and know that once you get people into housing and take care of the basic need, then we can take a deep breath and work on all of those other barriers that are stopping them from increasing their income or being successful at your housing endeavors. Thank you. And I am, let's see, who is the next person here? Aubrey.
Thanks so much, Kelly. Hi, everyone. My name is Aubrey Wild. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Advocacy Program Director at Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the coalition, our mission is to work collaboratively towards the prevention of homelessness and the creation of lasting solutions for families, kiddos, and individuals who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness throughout Colorado. The next slide. And for the last roughly 40 years, we've been taking a multi-pronged approach to both the prevention and resolution of homelessness, which includes healthcare, through which we've been able to serve about 15,000 folks per year, supportive and affordable housing, through which we've been able to serve about 4,300 households in a year, and supportive services, through which we've been able to serve about 20,000 folks per year. And I am part of the education and advocacy team. We're a small but mighty team, and we manage our governmental affairs, our coalition building, our public education efforts, as well as special programs like the Denver Basic Income Project, which I'm excited to talk about today. The Denver Basic Income Project is a pilot program in the Denver metro area, and the goal is to provide direct cash payments to unhoused members of our community to make decisions that best to suit their needs and provide dignity and agency over their own lives. This program is based in trust, in strong partnerships, and in the belief that people know how to take care of themselves and their family members. And if we just give them the opportunity to do that in the form of direct, unrestricted cash, that they'll most likely make those smart choices for themselves. And I anticipate that the research component of this project will bear that out. We know that based on the usage of homeless support services in the community, at least 32,000 individuals are experiencing homelessness in the Denver metro area. So I'm hopeful that this program will inform future strategies, practices, and policies for addressing homelessness and housing insecurity in our community. And we looked for inspiration from the New Leaf Project, which was a similar project that happened up in British Columbia, which is really exciting. And the results were really positive. So I believe that we'll have some really similar positive results as well. This is a public-private partnership, and this program is enabled by public funders, including the Colorado Department of Local Affairs and the City and County of Denver, as well as generous private funders like foundations and individuals. Our total budget is $9 million, $2 million of which, or about 22%, was invested by the City and County of Denver using American Rescue Plan Act dollars. And this funding is specifically for women, families, and children, and transgender and gender nonconforming individuals. Again, this is really the result of fantastic partnerships throughout the community. Our evaluation partner is the University of Denver Center on Housing and Homelessness. The fiscal sponsor is Impact Charitable. They make sure that the funding gets into the right hands in a timely manner. Our technology partner is AidKit, and they manage the online platform that is part of every aspect of this program. And the implementation partner was Mission Spark, and they have since phased out. There are about 14 community-based organizations like the Coalition working on this and making sure we can get the money into the hands of our neighbors. In order to be eligible, participants have to be connected with the partner service provider or a community-based organization. We call them CBOs. they have to be experiencing homelessness. And to one of the points in the chat, this is not the HUD definition of homelessness that we're working with. We're working with a much broader definition, more akin to the McKinney-Vento definition. So folks who are doubled up, living in their car, are sleeping rough, are in hotels or motels, are all considered experiencing homelessness for the purpose of this project. We wanted this to be as low barrier as possible. People also have to be actively addressing any mental health or substance use needs they might have. They can have mental health or substance use needs, but as long as they're getting some sort of treatment or counseling, that's what we're checking for. We used the Basis 24 tool to make that assessment. And this is a pretty widely used tool to assess a person's own perception of their mental well-being and substance use challenges, as well as the effect of the treatment that they might be getting. Participants also have to be 18 years old or older, but there can be children in the home. And they have to be comfortable with the possible public benefits impacts. And I'm happy to talk more about that specifically when we get into Q&A. So the program structure has 3 different payment structures. Group A gets $1,000 each month for a total of $12,000 over a year. Group B gets an initial payment of $6,500 and then payments of $500 each month for the following 11 months, again for a total of $12,000. And Group C is essentially the control group, but we want to make sure we're compensating them for their time and effort. And they get payments of $50 a month for a total of $600 over that course of the year. We helped about 1,600 folks apply and ultimately selected about half of those folks and randomly placed them into these payment groups. Next, please. So we were very thoughtful about the demographic makeup of the program participants. We know that people of color are overrepresented in the homeless community. And so we wanted to make sure that the population of participants in this project directly mirrors the population in the Denver metro area. So we oversampled the community of color in the participant group with about 67% identifying as people of color. And we also focused, as I mentioned, on women, non-binary, transgender, and gender non-conforming folks. Those folks make up about half of the participant group. And then nearly a quarter report having a dependent under 18. It's important for us to focus on these demographic makeups because we are focused on justice and equity, but also we want to make sure that any policy or practice or strategy that the results from this project point to are directly applicable to the community of people experiencing homelessness or that are housing insecure in the Denver metro area. Next. There's also a research component, and we were really pleased to see that 93% of enrollees opted in. This was optional, but when we gave folks the option, people were really excited about being part of the research and trying to demonstrate that people do know how to make good choices for their families, and really wanted to demonstrate the success of this model so that we can perhaps grow it in the future, extend it, or possibly lead to policy change at the state level or beyond. One of the ways that we administered or worked on this research component is through surveys that gauge people's health, well-being, housing stability, and financial well-being. There was an initial long-form survey at enrollment, and folks will take that again at the 6-month mark and then at the conclusion of the program. Folks are also asked to participate in short form surveys twice each month. Each participant was offered a smartphone if they don't already have one, and that's how we're sending those short form surveys periodically. And everyone is compensated for any survey that they take throughout this project. Participants may also be invited to complete interviews to help round out some of this research. And we'll see an initial report issued by the end of this year and a final report delivered by summer 2024. So to date, there have been 2 soft launches, one in August 2021 and one in July 2022. And we had our hard launch in November of 2022. And that applications and enrollment rolled through February. So this program will conclude in February of next year. So far, we've distributed $3.5 million of that $9 million total budget, and 844 people are participating in the program. And I wanted to share a quote and a photo from one of the participants who's been particularly vocal about his experience. His name is Joshua, and he gave me permission to share this today. And he said, "I was and still am just a regular fella, happened to fall on bad times and spiral down from there. DBIP has been going towards my vehicle purchase, repairs to make it perfect running, insurance, gas, and above all else, a feeling that I'm going to be okay after all. I finally got a good job that I actually enjoy and pays okay. I chose to spend my $6,500 on a stable, reliable vehicle that I can be in safely. Apartment will come later. Things are finally headed in the right direction now." So this is a great example of people just having that agency to receive this essential cash benefit and then make those choices to serve themselves and their families in the way that they see fit. And we're really excited to see how other people are faring with in these different program groups. This gentleman was in group B with that large initial upfront payment and then $500 payments each month for the rest of the program. And with that, I'm happy to connect with anyone following this presentation. Please feel free to take down my contact information, and I look forward to Q&A.
All right, thanks, Aubrey, and thanks to all the speakers. That was great, and I think helped show the diversity of what we mean when we're talking about increasing income for people, right? There's helping people increase benefits, there's giving people cash, and there's helping to support people toward employment and growing their careers. So, so along all of those lines, I want to also, the chat has been very active, and so is the Q&A. And I want to be clear that for this webinar, we're talking a lot about the services part of what Housing First means, right? That Housing First is a philosophy. It's the philosophy of giving people what they're asking for and what they need. And typically that's housing first, and then wrapping the wraparound supports around them as they choose how to navigate the support networks that we have either in programs, in the community, etc. So we definitely know that there's not enough housing and we need to do more to increase housing supply and to increase access to rental assistance. And one of the things we also, and among the services that we can do to help people is figuring out other ways to increase their income, especially since we don't have enough rental assistance and eviction prevention services. So along those lines, I want to ask some questions, and one is just a broad question, Kelly and Hannah in particular, as Aubrey's talking about guaranteed basic income, which for folks, there's also been some conversation about the universal basic income, guaranteed basic income. Guaranteed basic income is more targeted than universal basic income. Universal basic income often is talked about basic income to everyone, which means regardless of their income, so it could go to higher income folks as well. Guaranteed basic income and the pilot initiatives around that space are focused on people with low incomes or some subset of people with low incomes, and is more targeted. And so that's something that we're excited to see how what that shows us, which we expect it will show us exactly what we know, is that people need cash, and as Aubrey mentioned, we'll use it to pay for the things that they need. Kelly and Hannah, in particular, I'd love to hear your reaction to the pilot that Aubrey talked about and how it would, and how you see that in your communities. And Kelly, I'll start with you first.
Yes, I love it. As a matter of fact, when Aubrey mentioned it to us in the presentation that we had initially, I just thought it was something that's really awesome. With the program that we have over 42 grants that we are actually trying to facilitate on this end. And so with the grants, we are specifically asking for certain things that individuals need. The 18 to 24-year-olds need a little something different than some of the other people that we're working with. And so what we are trying to do is to have the grantees be able to offer what it is that the participants are looking for. And so if it is transportation, or they want to go back to school, they want to do, they're trying to get their car out the shop or put their car in the shop or things of that nature, or they need a laptop or a cell phone so that they can actually apply for a job and things of that nature. And so we have not done the cash, but we have really created an atmosphere so that they can get what it is that they're looking for, what it is that they're asking for. And so for some people, it's a bed for their new house, and for others, it may be clothing so that they can go to work. And so I love what Aubrey's program is actually doing, although it's not something that we're doing here at St. Joseph's Villa within Flagler. We are really trying to meet the individuals where they are and try to assist them from their point of view, their perspective, what it is that they need. And hopefully at some point, maybe we can actually do it so that we can give them the money and let them do what they want to do. I love that. I love it.
And Peggy, I'll just add a few things to what Kelly was saying. I'll be 100% honest. I was a little bit skeptic when I heard about these cash programs. I was like, because you never know, like I was just a little bit skeptic. And so here in Mississippi, we don't have any programs like that currently. I would be interested in to see if we could develop something like that here. It would have to come from like a private donation or some kind of private fund. It's not something that they're going to fund through our state legislator or even through, CRC or ESG. But we did see that it is successful even in rural communities. When we took into consideration the stimulus from the pandemic stimulus, we saw individuals in even our rural communities use that funding as rapid resolution, as diversion. One story specifically is like in an encampment in one of our communities, a couple of the individuals got together and pooled their stimulus money and they purchased a vehicle jointly, and then all of them got jobs at a local manufacturing plant and rode to work together. And so that is something they pulled their resources together and created a solution for themselves just because they had a little bit of unattached money that they could really identify what they needed. We had some people that they went and paid off a water bill because they knew that was one of the reasons that they would have difficulty getting into housing, is because they have late payments at the water company. They went and paid it, or they bought their medication. Like a lot of it was necessities. Like the stimulus money that they received was spent on necessities. It wasn't just gone and spent on all these luxuries. It was really spent on things that people actually needed. And so I was, they won me over. I said, I would love to see that program developed, even if it was a very short-term cash interventions, kind of like I mentioned, rapid resolution. That's something we really focus on in our continuum of care. That's a perfect use of that funding. So that's just one example of how beneficial a program like that could be.
Hannah. All right. We also had some questions about, the income gap for the gap between incomes and rents for people with disabilities. And so, Eric, I wanted to just ask you, do you have a statistic or two that you can help add weight to that issue as well?
Yeah, I'll just add one of those last charts I showed, which was the share of people living in low-income households that pay over half their income in rent. I didn't include this in the presentation, but for people with disabilities living in low-income households, about 42% are paying over half their income in rent. And beyond that, yeah, I would just repeat the calculations I shared. If you're living on SSI, that kind of fixed income, it's just, in many cases, it's just not enough to afford housing in most places.
Thanks, Eric. Hannah, when you were speaking, and this could be good for, I think, Aubrey, you had numbers of the number of people served in your presentation, but Hannah and Kelly, if you could go back and just give some scale to what you were talking about. So how many people do you serve, annually, or however you can break that down, and just talk a little bit more about numbers? That would be great. And Hannah, you could go.
Sorry, I was going to let Kelly go first. I'm so sorry. Yeah, so that's a great question. I know somebody in the chat was also asking like how many individuals were housed and throughout our continuum of care over the last year. I know for 2022, we had over 400 people housed throughout our continuum of care. That is just for COC and ESG and SSVF. That does not include anyone else, like other individuals who were housed through rapid resolution or diversion. It also doesn't include individuals that might have been self-resolved, things like that. That is just 400 people who were housed with a move-in date over 400. It's closer to 500 people in our balance of state over the year of 2022. I will say that ESGCV was extremely helpful. I will say I was very thankful for the funding that came through ESGCV. It helped us create a lot of housing solutions that we would not have been able to create without it. So that really helped us get through the pandemic, and we did not see a wild swing in homelessness in Mississippi, in rural Mississippi at least, during the pandemic due to some of that ESG related intervention.
For Flagler Housing and Homeless Services, I'm taking a look at, I don't have the third quarter information in front of me. However, for our first quarter, we had 339 people that were housed. And for the second quarter, we had 268. And that is in our Greater Richmond as well as our Crater region area. So that is a combination of how many individuals, females and males, that we have housed the first quarter and the second quarter. The third quarter, we're actually in the midst of working on the quarterly report for Wednesday's meeting. And so those numbers have not been given to me yet.
Great, thanks, Kelly. Aubrey, can you give a little more information about how this pilot got started? Like, what were the conversations like locally, and give anyone insight onto the kinds of messages that they need to share or be prepared for if they want to try to get a pilot started in their own community? One thing we know, like Mississippi isn't unique. Most of the pilots around the country have started with philanthropic dollars, and so and Denver is no different. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Great question, Peggy. So this was actually started during the early days of the pandemic, when an entrepreneur, just as an individual, began kind of doing his own little pilot program, kind of became friends with a few folks who were sleeping rough, and ended up, just seeing what would happen if he gave out $1,000 a month, see if that would be helpful for them. And so it really grew from just one individual's own motivation, and just gathered a great group of minds around him. And then we started pitching it to local foundations and other individuals. And then the public money came later. Really, it started with just a group of individuals kind of scrapping for support financially, and it grew from there. So I think Denver is particularly interested in public-private partnership models. We have the Social Impact Bond Project, which is now CIPRA, that the Treasury is supporting, that is based in a housing first model, and then looks at it's also public-private partnership, and then it looks at the cost savings to the city and to taxpayers. So I think we were well poised to engage in something like this because of the public-private partnerships we've had in the past.
And along those, and just also for you, Aubrey, can you talk a little bit about how this income does or doesn't get counted toward other benefits, and how you address that with families?
Yes, so this was one of the biggest challenges as we were envisioning this project. We wanted to make sure that this funding was beneficial for folks and didn't end up hurting people who might have other public benefits that look very closely at a person's assets or income. So for the purpose of taxes, this is not considered taxable income. At the state level, we got waivers for our TANF program and for Medicaid. So those two programs were not impacted at all by this funding. Then we identified through some research, and we put together a matrix. We identified that Social Security, SSDI, unemployment, WIC, and public housing were all pretty low risk. And then SNAP and SSI were the two programs that would be most impacted by this cash benefit. And so we had somebody who was specifically dedicated to counseling folks before they decide to move forward with this program to make sure that this was the right financial decision for them. They wouldn't be losing out more with the other programs that they benefit from. So I think looking forward, it would be amazing to look at other possible waivers for some of those programs that are most impacted so that these dollars can go even further for folks.
Right, and I think a key part of that, right, is giving people the agency to decide if they want to engage in the pilot program at all, and helping them understand the choices that they need to consider or the things that they need to consider in making that choice is essential and falls in line with Housing First, right? The whole point is to have people have the agency to be able to make the choices that they need to stabilize in housing, right? Eric, question for you. I'm going to combine a couple of questions. There's been questions in the Q&A box about fair market rents and rent increases. Can you talk about the changes that HUD made to their fair market rent calculations to try to be more to try to be more responsive to the changes we're seeing in market rents? And then on top of that, can you talk about anything that you've seen on what's happening with rent costs in the last few months or year or so?
Yeah, I'll start with the fair market rent calculations. I think it's pretty exciting development. HUD rolled this out back in the fall to go into effect in 2023. But right, what we saw, the FMR calculations are based on data that is a few years old. And so obviously during the pandemic, things were happening very quickly. Rent shot up in 2021 and part of 2022. And so in response to that, HUD decided to incorporate not just the census data that they usually rely on, that's usually a couple years old, but new private rent data from places like Zillow and Apartment List that capture, the housing costs right now in the market of things that are new leases that are occurring in real time, which better captures those rent increases. So that will pretty much automatically boost the fair market rent value pretty much across the board in the country to capture that. So that's one exciting development that HUD has rolled out recently, just to make sure that rental assistance keeps up with kind of the pace of rent increases. To your second point, I think I keep track of, like I said, private rent data that is more like in real time what's happening. And in the last few months, so it started to taper off in the end of 2022, but we're seeing rent estimates kind of return back to normal finally. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but it is reassuring. I think that initial spike in 2021 and for most of 2022, it looks, at least for now, that those kind of crazy rent increases have subsided for the time being.
Great, thanks, Eric. But the point that we always make, right, is that just means rents are remaining high. like the increases have tapered off, but the rents, the rents have remained high. And so that gap just isn't decreasing so much as not increasing at the extraordinarily high rates as it was before. So that's important to know, and an important as we advocate for more assistance, and we know that policymakers are hearing that rent costs are leveling out, to make sure they understand. But no, that means that they're still high, and so we have to we haven't fixed the problem necessarily, just slowed how bad it's getting, I guess, is the main point of that. Kelly, can you talk a little bit more, and then Hannah, you can go next, because I know you have a lot on this, and you both mentioned in your presentation about the partnerships that it takes throughout the community to make the housing first philosophy work in your communities.
Oh, my goodness, absolutely. We are partnering with some of the agencies that perhaps what they're doing is very different from what it is that we're doing. But to have our individuals understand that if you come to us and we can't get you everything that you need, we have the ability to partner with someone else who may be able to get that, whatever it is that you need. And so with Department of Social Services, I mentioned Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services. We have our mental health services, wraparound. And I saw that in the chat over and over and over again. Wraparound services, even within the villa, we have wraparound services because we do have a mental health capacity. We have a crisis stabilization unit. And so the partnerships are everything. The community being able to not do this thing in this silo, that you're the only one that's doing it, is just absolutely incredible and important for you to connect with agencies and other people who are doing the work, where you can expand what it is that you're doing, or if you're doing one part, they can do a different part. And so I have personally found, because I was, prior to coming into the director of program operations, I was the community resource and employment person. And so it was really important to connect them with Goodwill and Virginia Career Works and Virginia Department of Employment Commission, so that people will understand and really do a soft handoff, not just telling them where to go and giving them a name, but doing a soft handoff so that they are feeling comfortable with this environment, with this fact that they're already feeling a little vulnerable, feeling, in most cases, a lot of the individuals that I'm working with are not comfortable talking to other people or telling their story a million times. And so having that warm handoff is also extremely important when you're working with community partners. And we have over 50 community partners that we're working with just in the greater Richmond area. And we have two separate continuum of services that we offer in the Crater region, as well as greater Richmond.
Yeah, and then, it seemed, and I think too, right, part of Housing First isn't necessarily even handing someone off permanently, right? It's like handing someone off so that they can go get those services, but knowing that now that service provider knows you and the person knows you, so that when they need what you provide, they can come back, like just filling in the gaps for people across the community.
Absolutely. And in some instances, because we are a short-term program, so our program we are in the program with them for some 12 months and others up to 24 months, but we are connecting them to partners who may be able to work with them for a permanent length of time. And so if they are in this program with us and they are in need of additional resources or things of that nature, we're trying to make permanent connections for them because we are a short-term program. And Peggy, if you don't mind, I'd like to make a correction. Earlier, I actually gave you our demographic information and not the housing. So the information that I shared with you were all the individuals that we're working with, not just who was housed.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Hannah.
Yes, thank you. I will just kind of add to what everyone else has said. Is it's about making those relationships, especially within your community. The special thing about rural communities is that it is a sense of teamwork. A lot of it is like, that's why we've based our COC at a local level, making sure that we fund agencies to serve the region in which they're located. So like their staff lives in that community, their staff's family lives in that community, their agency is in that community. So it's like local accountability, local responsibility. So they know I want them to know every single homeless individual in their region on a personal level. I then also want them to know all of the supportive services in their region on a personal level, because it's their friends and family that work there. It's like the local faith-based communities as well. It's like just making sure that you're tapping into the local culture and the local community while you're implementing housing is extremely important. And getting all of the different law enforcement, school districts, all of those things involved is extremely important when you're working in a rural community and understanding the local players. Just because also within rural communities, they have very different, their homeless population could be very different compared to a more, urban community, or even just a larger community 2 counties over. A lot of our rural communities, their homeless population are people from their community. So it's individuals who have become homeless. I'll say this all the time. You become homeless in your hometown. So you have lost, a support network that was previously there in a place that you've always lived. And so we've talked about this quite often, and sometimes that involves a lot of shame. Like, we've encountered that as well. It's like someone is kind of embarrassed to admit that they are living unsheltered in their car, and in a shed or something like that, because they are in their local community. So taking even the stigma away from around homelessness out of it in a rural community has also been a very important. And that's just, and especially if we want to talk about employment, like I mentioned earlier, that's even more important, because we don't have a lot of the workforce development programs in rural communities than you would to the larger communities. Like I said, there's not a Win Job Center, there's not a local staffing agency. So you have to know the employers in that community in order to get your clients connected to a job, or connected to a workforce development program or something of that nature.
Great, thanks, Hannah. And one of the things that we talked about too, right, in rural places is the need to be able to access services across jurisdictional lines, because the mental health provider may be in the neighboring county and not in your county, and being able to get back and forth from where you need to receive services and that kind of thing. And so service providers being able to be connected to help pay for transportation and things like that, because they're understanding who you're going to go see and how and what the services provided is critically important. So there have been a few questions in the chat around serving people that have been involved in the criminal legal system. And so I wanted to give you all a chance to talk about that population in particular. And Aubrey, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Peggy. Yeah, that is really critical. The fewer barriers upfront with housing, the better. And criminal history can be a really big barrier for folks. For us in Housing First, we have very low barrier to entry. We have some restrictions around some certain crimes after a certain amount of years. I think arson and sexual offenses are where we make some of those determinations, but we try to be as low barrier as possible in our own housing. We also promote low barriers to entry into housing on a statewide policy level. And we've, along with partners, pushed for policies that limit how far back landlords are able to look at a person's criminal legal involvement and what sort of involvement they're able to consider. So we're taking a two-prong approach on that topic.
And Hannah, do you want to go next?
Yes, I just wanted to add, we have a couple of programs with the local municipal courts in our COC region that they're actually helping reduce the returns that we see. Like, kind of sometimes it can be like a revolving door. This individuals are picked up for loitering, for trespassing, just survival issues. You really like you're wrong place, wrong time kind of situation. So we're working with municipal courts in order to kind of reduce their, length of time in the local jail or their returns to the local jail. And so making sure that our unsheltered population is connected to their housing through municipal court has been extremely important. And then actually working with our local judges and our local law enforcement to reduce the criminalization of homelessness when people are just trying to exist in the world, kind of reduce those, the crimes that they get charged with there. And so that's been extremely important. And one thing too that we've said just as a COC is that if someone has an active warrant, we're not able to serve them through housing, but what we will do is try to get that warrant addressed. So we've actually worked with people who have active federal or state or local warrants, actually go and have those warrants addressed, and after the warrant is addressed, we can move forward with housing in the most appropriate way. So that's one thing we always do. Just because you have an active warrant or you have a criminal history does not mean that you're not going to be served. We're going to make sure that we're addressing those active issues before we move forward with housing, because we're not able to house someone with active warrants.
Yeah, Hannah, I'll add to that. When you're experiencing homelessness, essentially any sort of life-sustaining activity you take part in is a crime. In many places in Colorado, there are at least 375 anti-homelessness ordinances, so it's really hard to avoid criminal legal involvement. We know that if somebody has been to prison, that increases their chances of experiencing homelessness by 7 times, which is huge. And so making sure that people have a place to go when they are re-entering their community is essential, and also putting supports in place so that people don't end up in that system to begin with. And to my point earlier about how the cost savings to communities and to taxpayers, this is really a benefit for everybody. The Social Impact Bond Program, now called CIPRA, is really proved that out. The Urban Institute did some analysis about how much getting people into housing reduced costs to jails and emergency response, emergency rooms, detox, and it costs about half as much to house folks and give them the services they need rather than pay for all of those public services and emergency services and criminal legal services.
Well,
Thanks.
thanks.
Can
We
you,
have-
one thing, Kelly, before, Aubrey, since you mentioned the Social Impact Bond Initiative, could you just give a little bit more of what that was? So folks know what you're referring to.
Absolutely. So the Social Impact Bond Project has been active for maybe 6 or 7 years now, and this was a public-private partnership. So there are foundations as well as public entities that put money up put some money up front in order to build units for folks. I think in total, there are maybe about 350 participants in the Denver metro area. So around 350 homes were built in apartment style units. And we were given a list by the city of Denver of the highest utilizers of some of those public services that I mentioned. And then our outreach teams approached folks and asked if they would like to have housing through this Housing First model. And one thing that I love to share is that 99 of the first 100 people that were asked said yes. So that really debunks the idea that people want to be experiencing homelessness. If they have the opportunity to get housed, most people do want to get housed as long as they have those supports and that opportunity. And so after 5 years of this program, the Urban Institute did an analysis and found that there were some pretty substantial cost savings. Those initial private and public investors were paid back. And then we were able to grow that program, which is really exciting. And I think that's a great model for guaranteed basic income, housing first. I think this can be modeled in a lot of different ways.
Thanks, Aubrey. Okay, Kelly, I'm sorry that I interrupted you.
No problem. We have two regional, there are two regional housing navigators. That's their title. So with what the navigators do, they actually serve as a point of contact for the landlords and property owners. And so we have an opportunity to find out what's the best place for the individual to be placed, whether or not it is, most of the time, if they have barriers such as a felony or things of that nature in their background, we really try to talk to the landlord and have a relationship with them so that we can pretty much smooth the surface for them to be able to go into housing. Now, like Hannah, we cannot pay for housing if they are incarcerated. We are unable to use the subsidy money to pay for housing during their incarceration. However, if they go to court or something another has happened, they have a CAFIUS out, we can still support them. We can support them all the way up to if they are incarcerated for, I think it's 30 days. So 30 days and more. So if they went in for a week, we can still support them and assist them. We can connect them with reentry, no left turn, things of that nature that will help them. However, as far as the subsidy money, the funding that we can actually provide, and we can still provide case management, but the funding would not be able, won't be able to provide funding if they are incarcerated for 30 or more days.
Thank you. Aubrey, I'm going to ask this question to you, but if you don't want to, one of the, first questions we got was, and along the lines of employment, can you talk a little bit about the other ways Colorado Coalition for the Homeless helps people gain access to employment? In the question, we got a question about peer specialists, but I know that there are other things that that you guys do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Peer specialists are a huge part of getting folks onto a path of greater stability and, of course, building on that trust and camaraderie. So that's something that we've been trying to build on at the Coalition for the Homeless. We also have a robust vocational services team. And so they have those great partnerships with employers in the community. We've received some public funding to help with some programs that help support people who are trying to enter the job field. So I can't speak specifically to those partnerships or the vocational services program, but we know that they've been really successful in getting people connected with employment for the first time or after a period of not being employed.
Great, and I can find a link, or if we can drop a link to in the chat to that part of program or provide it afterwards too. But I also, did the pizza place survive through the pandemic? I have been to the
Unfortunately, no.
Oh no, I was wondering, all of a sudden I was like, oh, maybe it's not there. But anyway, Colorado Coalition for the Homeless used to had a building that had a pizza place downstairs, and people from the supportive housing development worked in the pizza spot, but that was before the pandemic. So we know there are a lot of businesses didn't survive the economic downturn for sure. So I want to pick back up where we were when we were talking about people with involvement in the criminal legal system. You all highlighted pieces of this, but can you talk a little bit more directly about how what you're working on lifts up the tenets of a housing first philosophy? Hannah, I'll start with you just really, to be able to raise up the parallels between the tenets of housing first and the programs that you're involved with.
Yes, thank you so much. I just going to reiterate kind of about why we are dedicated to housing first, or really focused on working with law enforcement to reduce criminalization on homelessness. I'm sorry, Peggy, I just wanted to clarify really quickly.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay. No, so one of the reason that we are so focused on housing first is because we've seen this success. We have seen the success in our communities around housing first because it reduces, like everybody on this panel has said, it is a natural solution for reduction in criminalization and the reduction in people who are experiencing homelessness going back through the criminal justice system over and over again, because they're housed. They're not out there, and they're not encampments where people can say that they're loitering or they're saying they're trespassing and things like that, because they're housed. And it reduces their their interactions with the local emergency room that they're using as a clinic, when they can go to their actual local general practitioner to get their diabetes and high blood pressure and things checked. So it's reducing not only the cost on public health, but also the negative mortality rates and the negative health outcomes that come with homelessness. So, and then not only that, but then one thing I always say is the reunification with family that happens when people are in housing. The fact that I've had examples of this in my own community, like where I live now. We've been able to get mothers to get custody of their children back from CPS. We've been able to have grandmothers see their grandchildren for the first time. We've reconnected families that haven't seen each other in 10 years just through Housing First, offering housing to that individual, able to get them a stable, healthy, and safe place for them to then start to get back into the workforce, to go back into healthcare, to reunify with their families. So having not even just addressing their physical need for housing, but their long-term health, emotional, and spiritual well-being is through housing. And so that is like the first step in the long process of stabilization. So that's why we're just really dedicated to Housing First, because we've seen it work even in little tiny rural communities in Mississippi where there's literally 500 people in the community. The entire community is 500 people. But there's a homeless individual there. We got them into housing. They were able to reconnect with their local community and their family and all of the resources they need to be stable long term. Sorry, that was kind of my pitch about Housing First, but I am really serious and really dedicated to Housing First, because we've seen the proof, and we know it's much easier to address someone's need when they're in housing than if they're still in their car or under a bridge or in an encampment. So I hope that answered your question, Becky.
That was great.
Okay.
Aubrey?
Ditto to everything that Hannah said. That's absolutely right. That's the philosophy that we subscribe to. That's the beauty of Housing First. And we hope that also the Denver Basic Income Project will help people, get that foundation. We believe that housing is the foundation of healthy families, healthy individuals, strong communities. And hopefully this can be somebody's first step back towards that path of stability, starting with housing, maybe in some cases, starting with just the shelter that a car can provide. In Joshua's case, it might look different for everybody, but giving somebody that opportunity for greater safety, greater stability, and hopefully eventually housing, and then all of those other services once you get that stability, I think is essential.
Kelly?
When we think about housing as being a right, and right from there, housing is a right, and Housing First approach just makes sense. No matter what the barrier is, no matter what is in your background, substance abuse, mental health situations, felonies galore, all of that. Housing is a right. And with that right, we are using this Housing First approach, not Housing First only, Housing First, and then all of the other things that need to take care of, we can take care of that. We can talk about your felonies, we can talk about your substance abuse, we can talk about the mental health, we can talk about getting your children back and increasing your income, but let's get you into housing, take a deep breath, and then we can work everything else. It is a right.
Thanks, Kelly. So Eric, I have a question for you around the data piece. And, as we work toward trying to make sure that we're reversing the inequities that racism and discrimination have caused, part of that is just naming the current status of how different groups of people, including by race, they're doing. One of the questions in the chat box touches on a particular pet peeve of mine and yours and others on the data team around being able to disentangle people who are Asian, Native Americans, Native Hawaiians. Can you just talk about the complications and the barriers to that, and the dreaded other category?
Yeah, you're right. That is something that it's a pain, or tough to deal with at times, despite your best intentions. I think, right, there's always this balance between, doing justice to all these different groups and their experience, and, weighing that with statistical reliability, right? So I think the big thing we run into is just small sample size. And especially with, survey data, you want to make sure that, you're disaggregating to the extent possible. And when you can't, right, I think, like you were saying, we try our very, very best to avoid using an other category, literally otherizes people, that get lumped into that category, and using something, more inclusive, like some other race or another race, and being really explicit in the notes about, who all is included in that. And I think, right, I think you just do disaggregate to the extent possible, and try to be as and when you can't include them, at least note that you're unable to include them, and list out the reasons why.
Thanks. And so for our final wrap-up question, Hannah, Aubrey, and Kelly, I just want to lean into, so you talked about Housing First and how and all of ours passion for Housing First initiatives. You talked really specifically, since this webinar is focused on income and employment, like give an example maybe of how that choice element comes into play for you and your programs when it comes to the income and employment piece. And Kelly, I will start with you.
Great. So as I mentioned, I initially was the community resource and employment person in our department. And I spoke a lot about employment. I talked about employment a lot. And then I realized that actually just need to find out, how can we increase your income? And it may not be employment for everyone. If you have SSI and SSDI, a lot of individuals think that they cannot work at all. And so that's the reason why they're like, I have my SSI or I have the SSDI or both, and I cannot work at all. And so what I started doing was I delved into the information to find out what you can do. And in most cases, they still could work a couple of hours. So what is it that you want to do? How do you want to increase your income? So I changed my entire conversation and took away, how are we going to find you employment, to what do you want to do to change the trajectory of where you are and where you're going? And when I had them have an opportunity to dream, they could tell me what it was they wanted to do. Now you tell me, how are we going to get there? And so that's when we can talk about increasing income. And for some people, it was not employment. It was in other avenues, in other ways.
Hannah, yeah, can you go?
Yes, so I was just gonna also mention about the client choice when it comes to housing, that we involve our clients in the housing process. The program participants actually, like our case managers will find 2 units, you find a unit, and then we'll get together and decide which unit is the best possible unit for you to, for long term. Same with the workforce. Our case managers will try to find the available jobs in that region. You also look and see the available jobs in that region, and then we'll meet together and see which one's the best option for you. And then if you need to take any kind of work keys test or any kind of skills test, our caseworkers, our case managers will help set that up. And so making sure that the client has a voice in the decision making, it increases their chances of staying at that job longer, accepting more responsibilities at that job. And then one thing I mentioned earlier is something we really focus on, is that their dream job might be unobtainable at this moment, but that doesn't mean it will always be unobtainable. So making sure if someone's like, oh, I want to be a welder, and they don't have any practical experience in being a welder, that's okay. As long as that is their goal and that's their plan, we can help them set them up for success. And that's one thing I failed to mention. A lot of our community colleges in Mississippi have training programs on jobs, like job skills like that, on trades, on skills, skill-based programs that we can kind of get them connected to as well. So if you do want to be a welder long-term, we're going to try to give you as many resources and as much assistance as we possibly can to help you meet that goal. And making sure that you're also, it's a relationship, right? So we both have accountability in this process. And so the client also has a voice and a role to play in their process.
Right. And Aubrey.
Thanks, Peggy. So when I think about the housing crisis, I kind of think about three main challenges. First is, of course, housing stock. In Colorado, for example, over the last 10 years, housing development dropped about 40% compared to the previous 10 years. So that's really huge, making sure that we have the ability to develop more housing specifically targeted at people at the lowest incomes or who are currently experiencing homelessness. And then second is that income piece or the resources. So making sure that somebody has the choice to grow their resources or income in the way that they are comfortable with and are excited about doing. So that could look like strengthening public benefits, like you said, Kelly. So that could be, through partnerships with that individual as an agency or through policy, trying to make sure it's easier to get on benefits or that those benefits are the amounts can be increased. Vouchers might come in here, and then making money go further. So making sure that there are policies in place that kind of reduce those financial barriers for folks to actually get into housing. And then finally, I think choice comes in again with the policies and partnerships to actually get people into homes. We do a lot of that work at the Coalition for the Homeless in Colorado. We have a robust housing navigation team that works with individuals and with community landlords. Then we're always trying to improve policies so that people are able to actually live in the communities of their choice and the type of housing they want to be in with family and in the structure that they want to live in. So I think it's a really a three-pronged approach to addressing this housing crisis.
Great. Thanks, Aubrey. And thanks, Eric, Hannah, and Kelly for a great webinar today. And thank you all for attending. And make sure to register for the next webinar in this series, which will be May 15th. And it will go over faith-based organizations that are involved in housing first strategies. So thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.